Hello. Today we're going to be talking about what is journalism and what it's supposed to be. It is sometimes difficult to distinguish between news and other types of media. This week you'll learn to define journalism and news. You'll learn about the purpose of journalism, and you'll learn the ethical principles that guide journalists in doing their jobs collectively. This information will help you distinguish between journalistic and other types of news media. This lecture will also contain some review questions at the end. As always, if you need any more time, you can pause the video. There are many different types of publications calling themselves news. Newspapers, magazines, blogs, tweets, social media posts. Are they all sources of journalism? Well, it depends on who you ask. Today, though with many sources of information, some media scholars, like Dan Gilmore, says that who is a journalist is the wrong question. Instead, we should discuss what is journalism. Before we talk about the definition of journalism, let's talk about the definition of news. We know that news satisfies a basic impulse. This is referred to as the awareness instinct, or the intrinsic need to know about what is going on that we cannot see or directly experience. In other words, there's something in our nature that makes us want to know about that which we can witness for ourselves, have a direct experience of it, be there, or we can't see. We want, other people to tell us what's going on. Even in ancient time, historians and archaeologists have found evidence of communication about important developments from faraway places, like news of war, information about trade, or even if there was a predator on the way. We are inherently interested in information that we cannot experience, especially if that information has the potential to affect our lives in some meaningful way. I want you to pause here for a moment and spend a few minutes thinking about your own awareness instinct. What kinds of information do you feel you have an intrinsic need for? So the the awareness instinct says that we have a desire for news. So, what is news? Journalism scholar Michael Schudson, in 2003, defined news as the presentation of information generally presented as true and sincere about contemporary affairs, general interest to the public. I'll say that again because I did it so poorly. News is a presentation of information generally presented as true and sincere about contemporary affairs of general interest to the public. Oh, that works much better the second time. Okay, let's break this down. First, news is information. It's knowledge. It provides some bit of knowledge we can't learn, that we can learn and apply to our own lives. I'll repeat that. News is information that we can apply and learn. That's a good way of putting it. Second, it is generally presented as true and sincere, meaning that news is not only information, but is based on fact, not simply conjecture. People have a big problem with that idea that opinion is not truth. Opinion is not news. So there's a confusion there, but news is generally presented as true and sincere. It's about contemporary affairs, meaning that it is likely to have some element of timeliness. It is fresh and new. Basically, news is new. It is the plural of new. And finally, we must have some general interest to the public for something that qualifies as newsworthy. It generally needs to be meaningful to someone. This can mean they're interested even in the very broad sense of the context, but it can also mean it's purposeful. It has meaning to someone's life in some way. So now we get to the definition of journalism. Journalism and news are not the same thing, even though people often talk about them interchangeably. Journalism is simply the business or practice by which we produce and disseminate our news. This practice includes journalistic decisions about what is and what is not newsworthy. We rely on news judgment, or the skill of weighting the qualities of one potential story over another in determining which one would best fit the definition of news we discussed earlier. Different journalists' views of what constitute news might differ slightly, but there are some common elements of newsworthy that emerge. These include, first, impact, or the potential effect a story might have on a reader. For example, a story about a road closing will have impact on those who live around where the road is going to be closed. Proximity is another element. This refers to the physical closeness of the story. For example, a story about Louisville might be more newsworthy to readers in Louisville than in St. Louis. It's a little bit different from impact. Impact, I did include a locality in my example, but I wasn't going for the locality. It was more, these people are going to have to find new routes to get where they're going. It's going to affect their lives. So that's newsworthy as far as impact is concerned. Proximity, that road closing is not going to matter to someone who lives in another state. The third one we want to look at is conflict. And conflict comes in many different forms. And one conflict that we sometimes overlook is the conflict between man and nature, such as strong storms or hurricanes. But most stories that are found newsworthy appear to have some kind of conflict or controversy involved. Timeliness, or simply the newness of the story. All things being equal, something that happened today is more newsworthy than something that happened a week ago. Next is oddity or novelty. I prefer the term novelty. And that is, how unusual is the story? You may have heard news defined as not when a dog bites a man, but when a man bites a dog. Well, that's where this comes in. It is something that is unique and fresh, and because it's unique and fresh, it'll be of interest to people. We have prominence, which refers to a story about someone who is well known. For example, if a president catches a cold, it's news. If your professor catches a cold, nobody really cares. And finally, human interest. This is kind of a vague concept, but it generally refers to whether a story is relatable to readers' lives or interest. A newsworthy story will never have all of these characteristics. Some elements of newsworthiness and news stories are, the more elements a news story has of newsworthiness, the more newsworthy the story is. Well, kind of its definition, so. But you want to have as many of these elements in a story as possible. Probably not possible to have all of them. In addition to meeting elements of newsworthiness, a good journalist also follows ethical principles. One ethics code from the Society of Professional Journalists is on your reading list for this week. But what's common among many codes is the utmost importance of the concept of truth. Journalism's first obligation is to the truth. However, in journalism, truth often gets confused with other related concepts. Let's explore these misconceptions before we define journalistic truth and the process of finding it. Truth gets confusing in journalism when it gets substituted by other terms such as accuracy, fairness, or balance. Let's look at the shortcomings of each of these substitute terms for truth. Take accuracy, for example. Let's say a reporter interviews a public official, but the official was lying. The journalist didn't know that and reported the statements made by the official. The journalist accurately reported what the official said, but it wasn't the truth. Another example might be the score of a football game being 21-14. It's accurate, but it may obscure the truth that the winning team was down 7-14 up until the final minutes. What about fairness or balance? Fairness is difficult because it's abstract and largely subjective. We all have our own definitions of what fairness is. Balance is also difficult because it assumes that there are only two diametrically opposed sides to the story, and both sides deserve equal weight. Objectivity is another concept that has gotten mixed up with the truth. Objectivity is often misapplied to individuals and not their work. The question then becomes whether an individual journalist is objective. This is flawed because no person can ever be fully objective. We all come with our own experiences and knowledge, which unknowingly influences our thoughts and actions. So, how do those practicing journalism make sure their work is objective? Well, what they do is make sure that their method is objective. That means that journalistic truth builds over time. It's a systematic search for understanding. It is a process. It is a conversation. This might remind you of the scientific method or the process that scientists use to explore new phenomena. It is based on observable, measurable evidence, which is based on logical thought and reasoning. The scientific method is also incremental. The objective journalist of that journalistic method, therefore, is the process journalists use to find the truth. It involves the discipline of verification or a consistent method of testing new information. This also requires that our methods are as transparent as possible. We let the public know what we're doing. Now, there are some unobjective forms of journalism. So going back to our examples of different journalism types, we might, again, ask ourselves, who is practicing journalism? Others in news media might be in the business of affirmation, or reaffirming misconceptions, prejudices, or ideologies. This is often seen in cable news punditry on all sides of the political spectrum, or it can be in the business of aggregation, or just indiscriminately collecting and reporting all information as news. They can also be in the business of assertion, which is making claims without any evidence. The discipline of verification is what separates journalism from other types of information. It means that whoever is producing it is checking assertions, avoiding all types of deception, striving for transparency, and stages of information collection, and relying on original reporting. What I feel about verification, it is an element of journalism that separates the blogger from the journalist, the person on social media that is, giving an opinion. Verification is what separates the journalist from the rest of the crowd out there. Okay, before we end, let's do a quick review. If you want to slow the pace of this review, you can always pause the video. In journalism, accuracy and truth mean the same thing, true or false. Which of these items is not a news value? Oddity, consensus, timeliness, or conflict? A journalist's first obligation is to the truth, the editors, the shareholders, or the audience. What separates journalism from entertainment, fiction, art, or propaganda? Accuracy, legal processes, truth, or verification?